County Coalition participated and did a lot of good things to get the evening ready. I'm also a volunteer at the local level for Sean, and this evening we are going to have a little bit different type of meet and greet. We're going to get started with some recognition, and then Sean will speak, and then you're on. It's your turn. Can I please see hands of those of you who have never talked to Sean, never asked a question? Look at that. In teaching, we would say, we got an audience here. That's awesome. After Sean finishes and we go into Q&A, you really are the most important person in the room at that point, at least with your question. Because when Sean is elected, and he will be elected, I can't wait till we can stop calling him a candidate and call him our congressman, because it's been a long time since we've had somebody to listen to us. But at that point, right? Give it up. We've not been listened to, heard, or if it was staged. So before we get into the evening, I have a moment of personal testimony. Please allow me. I've never worked on a campaign before. My life is certainly full enough. I don't need to be involved in campaigns. I would have voted for the Democratic candidate no matter what. That's just my thing. But I am part of a grassroots group. Kane County Coalition is Indivisible aligned, and been very active with that. Unfortunately, a few months ago, we had ICE, the ICE agency, come out, and there was raids in the western suburbs of certain businesses. I think mostly restaurants. We had an emergency meeting of our group, and at the very last minute, we asked candidates, and I think Sean was the only one to come. And in fact, I think Becky McCabe asked him, and I was like, that's stupid, he's never gonna come. I'm gonna come to our place. And because there really wasn't a photo op, there wasn't a large room of constituency, it was not for anything other than to come and find out things. So Sean comes to the room, and as you do with a candidate, you open up the floor, and he says his name, and he says what he's running for, and then he said, I would like to sit and listen. And he had me on his team at that moment. Because for somebody to have the humility, for some politician or somebody running, I'm trying to find the right word for it, for this office to have the humility and teachability to sit down and listen, that's our man right there. That's our person right there. That's what we need in Washington right now. And I'm thrilled that we are about to have that in Washington. So, I think, I'm supposed to make an announcement, excuse me. The Casten campaign encourages us to vote by mail. I think the wrong pronouns are here. I'd like to call your attention to the volunteers at the voter registration table. It's rather less a table than a person. That's Laura. And Laura, you can go get a form. When's the deadline?
The counties are mailing out ballots now. You'll get it within a week or so. You can fill it out and get that ballot turned in ahead of time. Research shows that in close elections, the candidate that has more ballots turned in by mail wins. And we know it's a close election, and we know we want this candidate to win. So if you're behind Sean, stop by, you can fill this out. It just takes about 20 seconds. We'll hand deliver that to your county, and you'll get your ballot within a week, and you can turn it in.
Thank you. Two more things. If you have a question on a card, if you would pass it to the aisle, and Kim Gilmore, who's waving wildly, you can put it in a little basket, and we will get that to you. And there was one other thing I can't remember. I'm sure it will come to me. Okay, so right now, if we could have all the folks in this room that have been part of a grassroots network, Indivisible network, if you could please come forward. No, I'm not kidding you. You gotta come up. Sorry. There's work to be done. We have special recognition for Sean Casten tonight, and we have the honor of the Indivisible state leaders as well as some local groups. Keith Bell is going to be giving a presentation, and if you would please welcome Keith Bell of Indivisible.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Bell, and I'm the legislative lead for Indivisible, Illinois. Indivisible, for those of you who don't know, is a grassroots organization, and our call to war, I guess, is really what's happening at this point. Is we are an issue advocacy group that is about trying to stop the Trump agenda from gaining footholds even deeper than they already have. So we started 2 years ago after the election by some former staffers, congressional staffers, who hopefully Sean will have very soon. And then we started 2 years ago. The organization has grown. We're now nationally one of the most recognizable groups. You've probably heard, different people saying different things about us. We encourage you, the reason that we're here is we encourage you to get involved. It's great to vote, but that's one step. You have to be active if you want to make changes.
That's right. Amen.
Woo!
And that's where Indivisible comes in. We have a network throughout the state, throughout the country, of like-minded progressives that are looking to make a difference, not just for this generation, but for the generations that come in the future. The reason that I am in this fight is because I have a lot of nieces and nephews that I can't look them in the eye and say, I'm leaving this place better off than when I got here. So my goal is to be able to look them in the eye and say, I've made this a better place for you. And I think that most of you here would agree that that's one of the biggest things that we as Americans can do, is leave better than when we started. And as a result of Indivisible's growth and our representation, we've decided to get a little bit involved in the electoral process, which includes endorsing candidates that have the temperament, talent, and convictions that we see as being nurturing a social change in our country that will make it a better place for all of us, not just some of us.
Amen.
As we've developed throughout the state, I've been lucky enough to meet and attend a lot of meetings, Naperville, South Suburbs, Carbondale, Peoria, and I'm hearing the same things over and over again. And that is that the Republican congressmen that represent many of the districts in Illinois are not showing up for their constituents. And that's one of the biggest failings that they're having right now. And I know that Sean will not be one of those congressmen. I've followed his campaign. I don't know Sean very well. This is my first time meeting him. But I followed his campaigns from the primaries till now. And I know that Sean really does care about this district. And the only way that things are going to get better is by electing candidates like Sean. Sean has a proven track record as a businessman that he understands and is able to evaluate a situation and give a reasonable response. He may not always agree with everything that we're saying, but he checks most of the boxes. Therefore, it is our duty to boost him and make him a better candidate so that when he is in office, I can then call him up and say, Sean, it's Keith Bell from Indivisible. And you know that bill that's on the floor right now? Vote against it. Vote for it. And I know that Sean will be a congressman that will listen to his constituents and not just take a platform of the money matters.
That's right.
People matter, and we have to take this back. So it's my pleasure to announce, along with Indivisible, so we have Indivisible Illinois, Indivisible DuPage, Northwest Illinois, and King County Coalition, and we are very excited to offer our endorsement for your next congressman from the 6th District, Sean Casten. We have a poster, our endorsement is on. And we're joining a growing list of people that have endorsed Sean. So we know that we've made the right decision. And we know that you will make the right decision on November 6th and put Sean where he belongs in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Brenda. This is a hard act to follow. I'm going to have to, I'm going to be let down now. Hey, before we get started, these things always take organization. Just raise your hand if you were helped to organize some of this event. Let's make sure. Just thanks so much for the people who put this together. I really appreciate it. Thank you particularly for recognizing I hadn't had any food today and I got here early and there was a cheese board, so I appreciate that. So I want to start, and this never fails, so don't let me down, but I want to start with a moment of optimism. And I think we heard some of this from Brenda. Raise your hand if prior to this electoral cycle you really weren't engaged in politics. Take a look around the room. It happens every time. And there is a tremendous amount to be truly nervous and truly afraid of about what's happening in the country right now. After the Trump election, I thought, well, we've lost the executive branch. Hopefully Congress will do its job. And Congress has not done its job. They've been completely complicit. And I thought, well, we've got the courts. And then, of course, this past week happened. We got one thing left. And what we've got is not Robert Mueller. What we have is that the overwhelming majority of the people in this country are good people who share the values of the people in this room. And the arc of history really does bend towards justice. It really does bend far too slowly. But it bends not because some enlightened leader stood up and made it bend. It bends because tens of thousands and millions of people on the ground jump up and say, we're going to bend this damn arc if they're not doing it for us. And what people are doing in this cycle and the unbelievable grassroots energy, and Indivisible, you guys are a poster child for this because you were starting early on, is inspiring. And frankly, I don't know, it's the only... I go home and I watch the news and I get really angry, and then I get to the office and say, holy smokes, there are a lot of people trying to make a difference right now. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for what you're doing. And take some cautious optimism. We got to keep working all the way to election day, but take some cautious optimism that we may not have been as good a country as we thought we were when we elected Barack Obama, but we're not as bad a country as you might think we are from reading the news. We are still the country where the majority of Americans voted for Hillary Clinton. We are still a country where a lot more people marched for women than showed up at Trump's inauguration. And marched for science, and marched for our lives, and are now working hard to get out the vote over these next 28 days. So what you're doing is important, and I'm truly humbled. Let me tell you a little bit about me, and as they said at the start, this is really more about questions. You all in this district have spent too long with a representative who doesn't meet you, and I don't want to be that representative, but I'll tell you a little bit of background about how I got here. My best friend from college works for a government agency that I'm not allowed to know what it is, so I just guess. And he told me 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, he said, dude, that's what he calls me, said, dude, you should run for Congress. And this is a person who's dedicated his own life to public service. And I have a lot of respect for him, which is why I said to him, dude, you're so stupid. and here we are. I became concerned about climate change about 20 years ago. I had gotten out of college, I was a biochemistry major. I knew I wanted to do something in the sciences, but I wasn't sure what it was. And I did cancer research for a couple of years and said this climate change thing is far too urgent and needs attention. And so I went back to grad school, got a degree in biochemical engineering, worked on developing advanced biofuel technology. That led to working as an engineer, working on fuel cells and batteries and other advanced technologies, and gradually became convinced that there are far too many totally proven, totally economic, totally underdeployed technologies for this to be a science problem. And if you develop any single skill being trained as a scientist, is that you have to deal with the facts as they sit, not the facts as you might like them to be. The facts as I wanted them to be was that all this scientific education I had was really going to be useful to what I wanted to do in my career. The facts as I had it was this wasn't a science problem. And so that led me towards trying to become an entrepreneur and having, you know, some degree of success, but ultimately building a couple companies that all had missions to profitably reduce greenhouse gas emissions with totally proven technologies. I didn't do anything with a patent, but we went into industrials, recovered energy they were wasting, turned it into heat and power. We didn't do a single project that was less than twice as efficient as the U.S. electric grid. And we saved a lot of money, built about 80 projects, would have done a lot more, but for the fact that we gradually realized that there's no thermodynamic laws to doing what we did that block doing more of it. There's no economic laws, but there are United States laws that get in the way. And so I got involved in some policy advocacy groups to try to do something about the one of those three laws you can actually change. And then on September 16, because we were a private equity-backed company and we'd invested a couple $100 million and our investors wanted to sell, we sold. And that was about the point when I got together with Tim and he said, you know, you've done all this policy stuff, you should run for Congress. And we just sort of hit a point where, you know, in talking to my wife and talking to other people I'd met along the way, having reached a point where any entrepreneur of any degree of success who tells you that their success came about from anything other than being able to work with really good people and getting a lot of lucky, doesn't quite understand what's going on in this world. I did a really good job of picking my parents. I did a really good job of picking the country I was born in. I did a really good job of picking my race and my gender. Right? And then I had the good fortune to surround myself with people of pretty good character who were motivated by a goal larger than themselves and believed in the win-win and believed that facts matter. And so then the election comes and I'm sitting there saying, everything that I hold dear is under assault. I have a president who doesn't believe that facts are even facts. I mean, they're alternative facts, right? Suffice to say, he does not surround himself with people of good character. And every single negotiation is a zero sum. You cannot win unless somebody loses. And we're better than that. And so that was the decision to run. And, you know, I want to tell a little bit of story about climate change, but really only to be illustrative. The whole theory of our business was that we're having the wrong political conversation, and you can't reduce CO2 without lowering your amount of fossil fuel that you burn, and nobody gives away fossil fuel for free. And therefore, CO2 uniquely as a pollutant, you can't functionally reduce it without saving money. And this whole conversation we're having about can we afford to reduce carbon dioxide emissions is a completely uninformed conversation. Now, you can't have that conversation if somebody disagrees with you, but you can certainly go into a business and say, look, pick whatever tinfoil hat you want to wear today. I'm going to save you money. Can I keep all the savings? I said, no, I want some. All right, fine. We'll have a negotiation. And as long as you're greedy, we can work together. And so that was how we succeeded. And ultimately, what's happening in the country right now, which is a point of optimism, the carbon dioxide emissions of the U.S. grid are plummeting. We were averaging 1,300 pounds a megawatt hour 10 years ago. We hit 975 last year. People are doing that out of self-interest, not because of the policy environment. Because at the end of the day, if you could own a power plant that has no marginal cost, that's a nice hedge against volatile energy prices. However, it's creating a ton of problems. You got huge parts of the grid that have too much zero-cost generation, and they can't dispatch it off because the signal they use is a price signal, and you can't send a price signal to a solar plant that makes them shut it down. And so we're investing in a lot of inefficient things in the grid, not because smart people didn't see this coming, but because the smart people were being ignored by a conversation that assumed this wasn't going to happen. We should have been investing in transmission, we should have been investing in cleaning up the regulatory environment to put generation in the right places. And these are good problems, but they're the problems of the win-win. The reason I tell that story is that it strikes me that so many of the challenges we face today fit into that same bucket. They're win-win problems that are masquerading as political win-lose conversations. So take our healthcare as an example. We spend more per capita on healthcare than any other country in the world, and we have worse health outcomes than every country that has universal healthcare. The next tier of countries below the United States spends about 60 to 70% of what we spend on healthcare per year per person, and has vastly better health outcomes. Since we spend almost $3 trillion a year, that means if you squint your eyes, we could save $1 trillion a year on healthcare that is better than what we have right now if we went to a universal healthcare model. Now, we're of course going backwards on that right now, but the problems that I would submit to you we should be talking about are, if we are purely motivated by greed, which eventually we will be, how should we allocate that $1 trillion in the system? Because if me as an employer who provided healthcare to all my employees all of a sudden saw the benefit of this huge savings, I would have become much more profitable. Is that the right way for the savings to be allocated? Or do we want to make sure it flows through the system in ways that we can, if we need to expand Medicare or Medicaid, whatever the tools are we're going to use to actually get to universal health care, we need to make it flow through. This is a good problem to have, right? This is how do you get better health care at a lower cost? And it's the problem that we would be talking about if we weren't pretending this was a conflict. We could have the same conversation about immigration. With one exception, every wave of immigrants to this country has been less prone to criminal activity than the native-born population, has been a net source of economic growth, documented or undocumented, and has ultimately been the thing that has made us Americans, because every single one of them said, I'm going to take this massive risk, I'm going to leave a place where I know the language, where I've got a community, where I've got resources, and I'm going to take a bet I can do better over here, and that's the fabric of the country. We're not doing that because we've got a false argument. And just so you realize, I said with one exception, the people that came in the Jamestown settlement were horrible people. They did not learn the language, they didn't assimilate, they committed horrible crimes. Since then, we've been pretty good. We could have similar conversations about gun control, we could have similar conversations about choice. I'm happy to talk about those in the question and answer session. But I think to a significant degree, I'm not a person who is going to say that what we need is a Congress full of people who look like me. Science and business has its place, law has its place, community organization has its place, but we would be vastly better off if the Congress was more representative of the diversity that's out there. Because the things that I just said, which may sound, if you thought in listening to me, boy, this guy sounds pretty good, I'd like to have a politician that thought that way. I would simply submit to you that if an employee of mine ever said that I'm going to make decisions based on facts, I'm going to look for the win-win, and I'm going to surround myself with good people starting tomorrow, I would wonder what the heck they were doing yesterday, right? It's only remarkable in a political context. And that is to say that we have not elected people who bring the diversity of experiences where these things are the bare minimum in their professions and elevate the level of discourse rather than lowering it the way we are right now. I'm not going to talk too much about my opponent other than just let you all realize what's at stake here. This is a district that Hillary Clinton won by 7%. There's only 5 congressional districts in the country. She won by a bigger margin. That's really nice for me because I don't even have to pretend to agree with Trump's policies. My opponent votes with Donald Trump 94% of the time. Before you praise him for the 6%, one of the votes he went against Trump on was he voted against Hurricane Harvey aid because he didn't want it to be stapled to a debt expansion bill. And then he voted to create $2 trillion of deficits for our country in the tax bill. There's no moral consistency there. He voted against the Violence Against Women Act. In 2015, he wrote a letter to the ATF saying that there was a sporting interest in people having access to armor-piercing bullets. In 2015, he voted to deport people who had self-identified in the DACA program. That one to me is really galling because you are essentially telling people that the United States government gave you its word that if you identified you did the right thing, we would create a path for you going forward. They trusted us, and he had the gall to say, I'm now going to hold that against you. This is how you ruin the fabric of democracy. But to me, really the most galling thing, and again, I've got to tell a little bit of a story back to my energy days. Back in 2009, I was running a clean energy advocacy organization, and we were trying to get a tax credit passed that would have provided some investment tax credits for certain technologies that we used. And I went to Jay Inslee, who's now the governor of Washington. At the time, he was a congressman of Washington State, asked him to sponsor the bill. And he read the bill. He said, look, I like this from a policy perspective. Have you got it scored? And I said, I have no idea what that means, Mr. Inslee. And he said, have you been to the Congressional Budget Office to find out what this bill costs? And I said, no, I haven't. And he was polite about it. I actually saw him last week. He still beats me up for this. He said, look, you cannot ask me as a member of the House of Representatives to go on the floor and to ask my colleagues to vote for something if I don't know what it costs. So I said, all right. So we went back, we got to the CBO, we got a score. It was a $50 million score. Fast forward. The vote to repeal the ACA, not the 60 under Obama, but the one that came through after Trump came in that actually would have mattered, which Roscoe voted for, would have cost 20 million Americans their health insurance, would have cost 30,000 people in this district their health insurance, would have cost 20 to 30,000 Americans every year to die. Those numbers are all in the Congressional Budget Office report, that same group. The vote was taken before the CBO report was released. Fast forward a few more months. The tax bill, which has a $1.5 trillion with a T dollar cost, was voted on and passed and became law before the Joint Committee on Taxation released the score. So I think both of those votes were terrible on moral grounds, but the fact that we have in 10 years gone from a point where one member of Congress chews me out for not getting a score on a $50 million bill to where the majority of Congress votes on and passes a $1.5 trillion bill without even finding out what the cost is, as a scientist, as a human, it offends me, because if you don't think you need to know things before you vote, I mean, it's nice of Brenda to say that I showed up and wanted to learn. This is a complicated job. It's an important job. You cannot possibly claim to be an expert on everything you have to vote on in Congress. If you don't think that learning things is a bare minimum expectation of the job, and that knowing things before you vote is a criteria, you do not deserve the office. And at core, for me, that's the big reason why I decided to run and do this, and why ultimately I listened to Tim. Couple facts that are positive, and then set up for questions. These are some facts that Mr. Roscom does not particularly care for. We have had, I think we're now over 3,000 people who have volunteered for this campaign. That is unbelievable. Those volunteers, not a one of whom was paid, much less paid by George Soros, in the last 3 weeks are averaging just under 19,000 doors they're knocking every week. We've been making about 100,000 phone calls a week. These are just unbelievable numbers, and it's, you know, when I said at the start how encouraged and optimistic I am by what's going on, it's really amazing. We've had over 80,000 people, I think we just cleared 81,000 today, make a contribution to the campaign. Average contribution, $20. That is, it's just people stepping up, and grassroots matters. And the beautiful thing, we actually beat Peter 2-1 on the raise. His money's all coming from corporate PACs, and we got 80,000 people coming up ahead of him. And that's great, and it's humbling, and I keep being reminded of Bill Foster's advice to me that he said, just remember you're the vessel for a lot of people's dreams, and they ain't cheering for the vessel. So all that's really positive, and it's gotten us to a point where we just announced that our latest polling last week, I'm up by 5 points. Plus or minus 4. Don't sleep on that. But it's an encouraging place to be. And like I said, this arc of history will bend not because of me, but because of all these people who are stepping up. If I was unique in stepping up in this period, that'd be frightening. But I'm pretty typical. Now here's the challenge to you all. Let's assume, hopefully, I win. If that's all that happens, I have a terrible job where I'm a bystander to destruction in a Congress that is still majority Republican. So let's assume that at least 23 other people win and we flip the House. If that's all that happens, we're still We're still waiting with divided government. The Senate is still a real problem, especially for judiciary appointments. And we can make progress, but it's not enough. So let's then assume that the silver lining of Mr. Kavanaugh is that he gets a lot of people saying the Senate matters too, and you know, hopefully Ted Cruz is also kicked into the social safety net. And a few others. And let's assume that we flip the Senate as well. Even if that happens, it still ain't enough. Because the tragedy we have right now is not that we don't have enough Democrats in power. It's that we only have one party that's committed to the idea of government. And, you know, I know this is a Democratic room, but keep in mind, there are plenty of good Republicans out there. There are plenty of Republicans, even in elected office, of good character, and not a one of them at this point is willing to do anything braver than quit.
Yeah.
And the only way that we get to a world where we have two parties that we can have totally different opinions about the best way to get from the world we have today to the future we want to have tomorrow. But when we're arguing about the future we want to have tomorrow, and when there's nobody who's willing to stand up on the other party and say, you know what, this isn't partisan to call out misogyny, to call out racism, to call out the fact that there was an actual member of the Hungarian Nazi Party in the White House. Those shouldn't be brave things to do, and yet no one's done it. So for that to happen, this election has to be a massive drubbing, and it has to be a win for the Democrats up and down the ballot, from county board to the governor's mansions and the Senates, because the measure of success has to be that Trumpism is dead.
That's right.
We have to get to a point where someone who has the values of my opponent does not believe he has a future in politics at the end of this election. So that will take your continued effort, your continued support. We have 28 days, keep on pushing, and with that in mind, I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you so much, and I think Corey's got it.
The questions have been looked over for redundancy. There is not a repeated question, but no topic has been left out, no question has been left out. It's 7:16. We're going to go for 20 minutes, have a 5-minute closing, and then there's 15 minutes-ish for, if your question doesn't get asked, that you can approach Sean, talk to him, so on and so forth, and eat, because there's a lot of food left. All right. Also, if this is your question and you want to remain anonymous, cool. But if you would like to raise your hand, they're good questions. So, with the new IPCC warning about climate change, does government need to take a more active role in funding research and prevention, mitigation, and how do we convince the general populace of that? Catastrophic effects by 2040. I don't know if anybody wants to.
So, I mean, here's the scary thing. We may be too late. I mean, let's admit the problem that we have. And that's hugely depressing. We should be doing, you know, one of the few places I agree with Sarah Palin on is we need all of the above right now, but all of the above ain't cool. We need research, we need regulatory reform. I take hopefully not too naive optimism in the experience that I had in the business world, which is that the challenges we have had to act are because we have created this false conflict. And if you frame this and recognize, and there's regulatory barriers, there's parts of the Clean Air Act that inadvertently but very significantly penalize investments in energy efficiency and conservation. There are parts of our tax code that inadvertently and inefficiently direct capital away from the most cost-effective ways to lower CO2 emissions. These are things that can be tweaked and should not be particularly controversial. And again, all my experience is that meet people where they are. If what you're concerned about is job creation, we can have a lot of conversations about all the jobs that are going to be created when we start building a lot of clean energy plants. If what you're concerned about is energy price volatility, we can have a lot of conversations about how having zero cost sources on the grid damps down price volatility. If what you're concerned about is just your own pocket, we can have a lot of conversations about replacing these light bulbs, which are kind of crummy fluorescents, with LCDs that would put a lot more money in your pocket. The only question we're left with is what's the rate of return on the investment we have to put up, And the good news is that we as a country have the capability to borrow money at a pretty cheap rate. We should be able to do that. Is that going to be enough? I don't know. But there's a ton of low-hanging fruit that's out there that is not blocked by technology. It's not blocked by economics. It is simply blocked by political will. Elect people who understand it. I do not give a rat's you-know-what about whether you believe in climate change any more than I care about whether you believe in gravity. We have to deal with it. Elect people who will deal with it, and we'll start. Hopefully we'll be moving quick enough.
I think we should applaud that. Next question is about gun control. What will you do about gun reform, gun control?
Lots. Start with facts because I'm a nerd. There are about 270 million guns in circulation in the United States. That's almost one for every man, woman, and child in the country, about 0.9. We're number one. The number 2 country in the world is Yemen. They have 0.53. That means that if you took 100 million guns out of circulation tomorrow, we would still be number 1. This ain't a Second Amendment issue. This is about too many guns issue. So number 1, put a ban on assault weapons yesterday. There is absolutely no reason. If your job does not require you to kill large numbers of people quickly, you should not have access to a weapon that's designed to kill large numbers of people quickly. Let me now talk about, we got 3 separate issues. I think you can sort of bucketize all avoidable gun deaths into 3 buckets. And let me start small and get to the big one. The smallest, although the ones that's most in the news, is mass shootings. In terms of the people we lose every year, it's the smallest bucket. The only thing that is a statistical predictor that you're going to be a mass shooter is that you're a white male, 14 to 45 years old, with a history of domestic violence. I'm 46 and I do not have a history of domestic violence. If we're talking about background checks for guns, that's where you start. Take away guns from people who have a history of domestic violence or under restraining orders, and you substantially reduce the risk of mass shootings, and we should have done that yesterday. Now let's move up to the next biggest bucket, which let's call generically, because of where we are, Chicago gun violence, but basically, bad dude shooting bad dude, or, inadvertently shooting good dude in primarily inner cities. In Chicago, I've got friends at the Chicago Crime Lab, and I've asked them, why is it that Chicago's going the wrong way on gun crimes relative to New York and LA? And she said it's real easy, because New York and LA are not driving distance to Indiana. 40% of all the gun crimes committed in Chicago are guns that were illegally brought over from Indiana. And what I think is the most sensible way to do that is to do what President Obama proposed, but ultimately didn't have the support to bring it across, which is to regulate guns like cars, and say that if you want to be a responsible gun owner, it's cool. You need a license, you need a registration, you need proof of insurance, and if somebody shows up with a gun in a sewer in Edgewater that's licensed to you, we're going to come into your house in Indianapolis and say, hey, I've got an orange jumpsuit for you, come with me. You'd create a lot of responsible gun owning culture at that point, and you wouldn't in any way infringe on people's rights to be responsible about it. Now let's get to the hard one on number 3. The overwhelming majority of gun deaths in this country are suicides. That is the only place where it really makes sense to talk about mental health. And I would urge you all, Bill Foster said to me a long time ago that religion is what politicians talk about when they don't want to talk about ethics. Mental health is what politicians talk about when they don't want to talk about gun control. If you have mental health issues, you are statistically more likely to be a victim of gun crime. You are not more likely to commit a gun crime unless it's against yourself. And that's the only place where it makes sense to say, let's talk about how we make sure, without infringing on people's rights, but let's make sure that if you have mental health issues of a type that can make you suicidal, let's make sure that you don't have the means to do the job before you get proper health treatment. And that's a much trickier civil liberties issue, but it's the one place where I think it's worth talking about that, about the mental health angle.
Healthcare. what ideas do you have for making healthcare affordable for all?
So as I said in the start, the math on this is actually, if you take sort of a best practices view, which is the way that I look at the world, just given my background, when the best countries in the world on outcomes and costs have universal health care, then we got to get to universal health care. If you look at all the countries that have universal health care, there's a packet of them, all of them are cheaper than us. There's a packet of them that are really cheap and have not great outcomes, and there's a packet of them that are moderately cheap and have really good outcomes. The primary difference between those two is the number of payers. And so you have the NHS model in the UK that's really cheap. They spend like $4,000 per person per year. Their outcomes are vastly worse than the Swiss and the Germans that spend about $7,000, $6,500 per person per year, but they have multiple payers in the system. And so from my perspective, in many ways that's a positive, because if you take the ACA as drafted, so let's first restore the things that have been broken recently. Let's put the risk corridors back into place. Let's get the individual mandate back. Then let's modify it as it was initially drafted before that darn Joe Lieberman got in there. Let's put the public option in so that you get to something close like, almost universal. You probably at that point still have to think about expanding Medicare and Medicaid, because there's some portion of people who either can't work or don't have the wealth to buy into one of those things, but you're talking kind of a small piece once you've got that in. If you do those things, you actually have a model that from a regulatory perspective looks an awful lot like the Swiss model. You can buy from your employer, you can buy from your union, or have provided. You should have an option to buy into Medicare if you want. And that model is so much cheaper that I think it's the right tool of government to say, this is better outcomes and lower cost. Let's give people that option. If you as an individual then want to pick a plan that is cheaper but worse outcomes, and maybe you do. Maybe you're young and healthy and say, I'm going to take the $1,000 deductible plan. You should be free to do that as an individual, but I don't think government should be mandating that choice.
Infrastructure. How do you plan to help support our nation's crumbling infrastructure as well as broken public transit systems like Amtrak?
So, number one, and I'm going to try to come back to this if I organize my thoughts right. Think about infrastructure more broadly than you usually do. We think about infrastructure as roads, bridges, tunnels. A lot of the physical infrastructure in this country was also built by the private sector. Steel mills, chemical plants, even our railroads at some level, right? Let's talk just about the public infrastructure for a minute, and then I want to come back. What I find maddening about the way we talk about fiscal issues in this country coming from a business world is that I would submit to you that almost every newspaper and every so-called smart politician who talks about economics would fail a first-year MBA class on capital budgeting because they have no idea what the balance sheet is. It's really hard to have a conversation about whether or not we have too much debt if you can't tell me how many assets we have. And it's really hard to have a conversation about should we invest in infrastructure if you don't say what is the return on this infrastructure and does it exceed our borrowing cost. You would do that all the time. As a business, you would do it all the time as a homeowner, right? When you go out and take out a mortgage on your house, you think about that debt differently than you think about credit card debt. But we don't think about it that way nationally because we don't have a national balance sheet. So I would frankly love to see us do what the UK does and tell our accounting agencies, the GAO, create a national balance sheet. Then let's have an informed conversation, because then we can do things like saying, how do we fund our roads and bridges? Well, what's the return? When when you repair potholes, you get less damage on trucks. When we make sure that our rails and bridges work, we get less congestion on the highways, which means that people can make deliveries faster and they can have better lives. When you invest in rail, all sorts of other things get rationalized in the world. There's a real economic value that's there. And yet the only way we fund that right now is with the gas tax that we haven't raised since 2008 because people who are supposedly fiscally conservative think it would be dangerous to raise that. But meanwhile, the overall inflation in the country is up like 65% since then. So we're starving an asset in order to create short-term cash flow that you would never do if you thought about this from a pretty basic financial perspective. So create that. I'm not averse to raising the gas tax as a way to pay for it, but it's not the only way. Because if you can borrow money at 3%, I mean, what's 20-year debt trading at for the U.S. right now? If you can borrow 3% money and invest it in something that's going to return 7%, 8% returns, we don't do it. It's just smart policy. On the private side, that I said at the start, had I not decided to run for office, the thing that I was thinking about doing next was, I was on a panel many years ago with the guy who at the time was the CEO of American Electric Power, and he and I didn't always get along. I tried to take money from him because I wanted to help his customers save money with me instead of with him. But on this issue, I agreed with him, and he said the central problem we have in the electric grid in the United States is that everybody wants to be the third owner of a power plant, and nobody wants to build them. And there's a real problem in capital markets right now, that capital markets don't fundamentally like to build things. Because when you build things, you tie up your capital for 2 years, 3 years, then you get it commissioned, it has to sit there for a while. Once they're built, everybody wants to own them. I am today unemployed because having gotten my investors to build assets, they all of a sudden said there's a lot of people who want to buy these, we could sell them. But it makes it great. Now you've sold to someone who doesn't like to build. And there's a richer conversation to have about that, but I think there are things we could do within our fiscal policy and within our tax code to remove some of the barriers that exist to the private sector investing in infrastructure. I'm not sure that's solely a government problem, though, because for a whole lot of larger macro reasons, financial markets have become much more short-term and too short-term. Even private equity that we were in, 5 years is long-term. The era when people used to build, family-owned businesses that lasted for 20 years, that's kind of behind us. And I don't know how you go back to there, but I think it's worth a conversation about how to do that.
You're really smart. It's a good answer. I'm not being asked. Younger voters, what is your campaign doing to appeal to younger voters?
So this morning, I was talking to 200 social studies students at Downers Grove North High School. 2 days ago, I was speaking to the AP government class at Cary, which was nice. Here's the challenge with younger voters. They don't vote. And I don't mean that as a laugh line, right? If you're sitting there and saying, why does every politician have a talking point on Social Security and almost none have a talking point on opioids? Because what's the point of learning about something that's only relevant to people who don't vote? And I don't mean to be crass about it, but my message to the students this morning and last week is you need to vote not simply because your vote might swing an election. You need to vote because everybody in my shoes who's going out and saying, what do I have to learn about? If you think I sound smart, it's because I studied stuff. And the stuff I studied is stuff that I thought I had to know because the voters cared about it. And when a pollster calls your house, the first question is, are you likely to vote in the next election? If the answer is no, we move on to the next call. And so, getting those students to vote, and I think the single best thing that's happening, and this is depressing that it had to happen this way, but the single best thing that's happening to the youth vote is Parkland. The fact that those students are taking that horrible act of hatred and turning it into an act of love, when you look at nationally, the propensity to vote among that age cohort is meaningfully higher than it was prior to Parkland. If they don't show up on November 6th, it ain't going to matter. But what they're doing is great. I don't know how many of you have seen them, seen the students speak, but when they were out in Naperville, when was that, 2 months ago? Something like that? Time flies. One of my favorite moments was, the students are all, and not the celebrity students, with schools they don't, the ones you recognize are not necessarily the ones on the stage, but they've got this panel up there. And they're all talking about what they're doing, their traveling tour over the summer to get people talking about gun control and, get them to understand. And then they open up to the questions afterwards, and somebody says, so, at the end of the summer, you're going to go back to school. What are you going to do in the fall? And this kid who's sitting there, he doesn't even hesitate, just leans forward to the mic and he goes, I'm going to vote. And so I hope that's what they do.
The EPA, as congressman, is there anything you can do about the destruction of the EPA?
Please put adults back in charge. Look, we have an example from the not too distant history of what a Congress can do when Congress recognizes that it is a co-equal branch of government that has an obligation to act as a check and balance. Ann Gorsuch, any of you remember that name? Neil Gorsuch's mother. When she was appointed the head of the EPA in Reagan's first term, the Congress brought her up on all sorts of criminal charges that look an awful lot like what Pruitt was doing, not quite as bad. But they got her to step down and got her replaced with Bill Ruckelshaus, who, remember, had previously been overseeing the Watergate hearings, knew a little bit of something about good government. He came in and overhauled the EPA. Now, this is a strange thing. Well, no, this isn't strange. Ronald Reagan was a much better man than Donald Trump is. And whether there's that kind of maturity so long as Trump remains in office is tricky, but Congress does have the ability to act and the experience to act. Short of that point, there are things that Congress is doing right now that are hugely troubling that can be reversed just by putting adults back in charge. There was a vote not that long ago, which Peter Roskin voted in favor of, to remove the ability of the EPA Science Advisory Board to employ people who have ever done work that was funded by the EPA, which has the practical effect of not allowing the Science Advisory Board to employ scientists who actually understand the science on the issues and staff it with lobbyists. Trump is now trying to eliminate that whole office, the Science Advisory Board office. These things could all be blocked by a Congress that cared about science. And particularly, some of you may know down in Willowbrook right now, there's this Sterigenics plant that's got people nervous about this huge increase in cancer. The board the part of the EPA that 2 years ago said this chemical that we've been studying for 2 decades and listed as a possible carcinogen, we're going to elevate it to class 1 carcinogen, that was the EPA Science Advisory Board. That's the group that is being attacked in this sort of fetishization of ignorance that's crept into the Trump administration. And we can fix that if you elect people who recognize that knowledge is good. And man, it's urgent to do it. So we can, but it'll not as much as I think we'd like to until we get a new executive.
All right, we have time for one more question, and there are a number that didn't get answered or asked. So please take that opportunity if you have some time to personally talk to Sean. Student loan crisis. How would you handle the student loan crisis, and how would you... Oh, then it went right into Social Security. They slipped another one in here. So student loan crisis, and then second, strengthen Social Security, and we have 5 minutes.
First, I was student loan. 3 easy things, 1 hard thing. Easy thing number 1 is that the cost of higher education is consistently growing faster than inflation, and Pell Grants are fixed. So if we simply index Pell Grants to the cost of college tuition inflation, we would at least eliminate the inflation squeeze that's hitting families who aren't fabulously wealthy. Thing number 2 that we could do, and I'm glad to have these opportunities to be bipartisan in my criticism of former legislators. We can get rid of the rule that Joe Biden passed in 2005 in the bankruptcy bill that made it impossible to get out from under student loan debt. And because you can get, if you go personally bankrupt, you can get out from under your mortgage, you can get out from under your credit card debt, you can't get out from under your student loan debt. That was done to protect the banks, we don't need it. Thing number 3 we could do is to allow people to renegotiate their loans at current interest rates, which again, you can do on mortgages, you can do on other types of debt instruments, you can't do it on student loan debt. Those things would all help. They're probably not sufficient, but they would help. The tricky thing, and there's more moving pieces in this. I sit on I'm on sabbatical now, but I sit on the advisory board for Dartmouth College's engineering school. I went there and we advise students on basically how to get jobs and internships as they get through, because doesn't matter why. One of the things we talk about almost every year is that because the marginal cost of education scales with labor, and because our economy keeps getting more productive, there's almost no way you can look forward and not see a scenario where the cost of higher education isn't going to grow faster than the economy. Maybe someone will come up with some magical way to have robot teachers, but until that happens, I'm not sure the teachers next door would like that. Until that happens, you're stuck with how do you deal with that fundamental problem. And we spent a lot of time talking about it, we haven't had any great answers. What I have learned in the course of the time with them is that if you are fortunate enough that your kids can go to a Dartmouth or a Harvard or one of these other schools with big endowments, your actual out-of-pocket costs are pretty reasonable. There's pretty generous student aid, if you needs-based programs, and it's not to say that it's great. And I'm secretly hoping that my daughter's trumpet skills keep developing so that I don't have to pay for college. But the real driver of the increase in higher ed cost is primarily in the state schools, and is primarily a function of the fact that A, they don't have these massive endowments, and B, the state contributions to tuition have gone from 50% or more 20 years ago to 25%, sometimes less than 20% today. And that pressure from so now you've got schools without the endowment, and when you look at why is U of I so much more expensive than it used to be, it's because you're asked to bear the burden of payment that used to be the state kicking in and subsidizing that for you. And the big drivers of that reduction, it's not that the state became less generous, it's that you had all these unfunded mandates kicked to the states that squeezed their budget. You had some massively irresponsible decisions around pensions in Illinois about 20 years ago. And then you also have this issue of Medicaid, because the healthcare system also has this marginal cost problem, that the marginal cost of healthcare also tends to scale with labor. And because we have such an expensive healthcare system, you've put states in this horrible position where grandma needs insulin medicine, junior needs a college education, and the college just put a beautiful new paddleball court in. Where are your sympathies going to lie? Now, they put in the paddleball court out of the endowment. It was given by donors. It's not really tuition, but it looks bad. And so the pressure has been, as you get squeezed with the higher contributions to Medicaid, to preferentially take state resources towards those health fundings and take it away from colleges. So in a weird kind of bank shot way, fix the healthcare system, and all of a sudden you got a lot more cash in state coffers. Elect people who won't kick obligations down to the states and do things like double taxes on our state and local taxes and make it harder for states to provide the resources they need. And you start to give more money to the states that at least directionally gives them some more degrees of freedom. Is that sufficient? I don't know. But I know we're going the wrong way on all three of those right now, and hopefully that would help turn the tide.
So now, I'm going to take the mic back again.
Our next 6th District, Illinois congressional person, Sean Casten.